Good afternoon. I'm Tamara Small, CEO at NAIOP Massachusetts, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the first NAIOP DEI Advanced Series of 2022. Today, we have an incredible lineup of speakers who will discuss Inclusion 2.0, how national investors are shaping the future of inclusion in commercial real estate. Before we get started, I do have a few quick announcements. Now is a great time to join or renew your membership in NAIOP. Join and take advantage of free and discounted events and courses, exclusive members-only events, like our ski day later this month, which sold out before we even opened it to non-members, and special members-only resources, including participation on our member-only committees. NAIOP is here to help you build connections and navigate the commercial real estate landscape in Massachusetts. We have some great upcoming events and courses planned for 2022. On January 26th, we have the MIPA director, Tori Kim, who will be speaking about the new environmental justice regulations and some upcoming changes to MIPA. On February 3rd, we are overjoyed to have our in-person NAIOP networking skate and sip at the rink at 401 Park. There'll be ice skating and light refreshments from 5 to 7, and we hope to see you there. On February 10th, we'll have a great program with some more national experts. We'll be talking about supply chain challenges. That will be, again, on February 10th from 12 to 1, and the focus will really be on the impact on commercial real estate in the year ahead. On February 16th, and our second NAIOP DEI Advanced Series will be on the importance of authentic community engagement. We have a great lineup, including Shirley Young of the Boston Globe. In addition, NAIOP Massachusetts University, our educational courses are now enrolling. Courses do begin in March. We have a great lineup, March 10th, commercial property acquisition and sale due diligence. Then we'll have our real estate development fundamentals course and our introduction to construction management. And finally, stay tuned for NAIOP's new, soon to be announced Professional Development Institute, which kicks off on March 4th. For more information on these and other events, please check out the NAIOP event calendar on NAIOP's website. Each year, our chapter offers members and businesses a number of opportunities to optimize their company's exposure by partnering with NAIOP. We recently announced our 2022 offerings, and a few limited opportunities do remain, including sponsorship of our NAIOP Massachusetts University courses. For more information, contact Debbie Ostroff, NAIOP's Director of Membership and Administration. NAIOP's 2022 DEI efforts are generously supported by the select NAIOP Gavel members listed on your screen. Their support of the NAIOP DEI Fund allows us to support a wide range of DEI initiatives. Thank you all. Now let's get started. Please ask panelists questions using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. The chat function will be disabled to ensure we can see your questions. I apologize in advance if we do not get to your question. Should you experience any technical problems, we recommend that you log out and log back in. With that, it's my pleasure to introduce today's moderator, Jeanne Pinado, Executive Vice President, Boston Investment Sales, Equity Placement at Colliers. Jeanne?
Thank you, Tamara, and we appreciate your leadership. It's a privilege to serve as your moderator today. We have three great panelists you'll hear from. They're national experts in commercial real estate and have a national perspective around diversity, equity, and inclusion. You'll hear from Lisa Davis, Frank Frallicciardi, and Kirk Sykes. We'll start with some brief presentations from Lisa and Frank, and then we'll have a conversation with all three panelists. As Tamara mentioned, we're using the Q&A function, and we'll address audience questions towards the end of the hour. So let me start with some brief introductions. Lisa Davis, based in New York City. Lisa's responsible for developing and leading PGIM's real estate's impact investing strategy as its portfolio manager. Previously, she raised capital from institutional investors for commercial real estate investments, primarily affordable housing and community development at Pembroke Capital Management. And she spent 6 years at the Ford Foundation funding affordable housing and community development. Before moving to New York, Lisa spent 12 years in Boston. We knew her then. She's got a master's in real estate development and planning at MIT and developed affordable housing with a Dorchester-based community development corporation and worked with Kirk at New Boston Fund. So Lisa, great to have you back in Boston virtually. Frank is with Brookfield Properties. He's the Senior Vice President of Development, responsible for executing Brookfield's development strategy throughout the New York, New Jersey, and Boston regions, including the development of multifamily housing, retail, and office development. Prior to Brookfield, Frank served as Vice President of Development at Forest City Realty Trust. Frank has managed the development of 3 million square feet of residential, retail, and office projects. He's responsible for the development of the 18-acre Hudson Exchange mixed-use project in Jersey City, New Jersey. And our third panelist, Kirk Sykes, doesn't need any introduction to our Boston audience. Managing Director of Accordia Partners, a real estate development and finance company, formerly the head of Urban Strategy America Fund, a triple bottom line fund, focusing on investment returns in economic development and environmental sustainability. Today, Kirk's Dorchester Bay City project will bring close to 6 million square feet of office, lab, residential, and retail space to a nearly 34-acre site in Dorchester. And it's a project that has a really unique diversity, equity, inclusion strategies. Kirk ran an architectural firm when I met him back in Boston a long time ago, and currently serves on Boston's Civic Design Commission. So Lisa, we'll get started with you. I know you have some slides to share from your ESG report, so take it away.
Great. Thank you, Jeanne. It's great to be here with you and Kirk. It feels like I never left in some ways. So nice to be back with the Boston audience and talking about this issue. So as Jeanne said, I work for PGIM Real Estate. We're a global company. We're the second or third largest real estate manager in the world. I think we compete with Frank for that off and on. And we have a variety of types of investments that we make, debt and equity. I sit in the equity side of the business, and generally we make investments directly in real estate through joint venture partnerships with local owners, operators, managers, developers of real estate. That's an important detail that we'll get to as the conversation goes on. Where I sit in the firm is I'm a portfolio manager for an impact strategy that makes investments in affordable housing and mixed use, mixed income development. I also do a lot of work on the ESG strategies for the firm, which we include diversity, equity, and inclusion as a part of what we do with ESG. And really, I think the takeaway that I want to give you from my presentation is that we consider DEI to be a business imperative and a competitive advantage. And we publish our DEI stats annually in our ESG report. You can find this on our website. If you'll go to the next slide, it'll just give you a high-level summary. And this is where we are as a global company with DEI. 44% of our workforce globally is female, and in investment roles, 31% of our investment professionals are women. In the US, 25% of our investment professionals, so this excludes sort of administrative positions, are people of color, which brings us to kind of an overall gender and people of color diversity stat of 53%. I think this is significant for a number of reasons. Studies show that diverse decision-making, having a diverse board, a diverse investment committee has a positive outcome on investment performance. And the threshold for that, the minimum to get the maximum amount of good on the gender side is 30%. So we definitely see that as an important part of our ability to make good investments. And then in terms of workforce diversity, actually over 50% of our US portfolio managers are diverse, are either women or people of color. And we publish this annually, we track it regularly. I think another important element of DEI is transparency and measurement. And I'm sure we'll come back to that in the course of our conversation. If you'll go to the next slide, I want to talk for just a moment, introduce how we think about DEI kind of comprehensively across our business and talent and investment practices. This is not new. It's something we've been doing for a long time, but really about a year and a half ago, we set out to formalize this through a number of senior management level driven work streams, and the 4 areas that we focused on are listed here on this slide. So obviously focusing on talent, talent management, talent recruitment, talent retention. We have a number of partnerships that we use to do that. Also focusing on investment practices. So that includes things like vendor and partner diversity, as well as the impacts of our investments on women and communities of color. We seek to have, a leadership role in DEI in the industry. We're obviously a member of a lot of industry groups and want to be a leader in DEI as a business imperative for real estate. And then finally, our parent company, Prudential Financial, has a strong background in community engagement through their headquarters in Newark, as well as kind of community connections and corporate engagement with local partners across the country and across the world. So that's a general overview, Jeanne, and I look forward to questions as we go on.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And I'll turn it over to Frank to share some information about Brookfield.
Sure. Thank you guys so much for inviting me to join this panel. This is an incredibly important topic across the real estate industry, and I really, I'm very excited about how the discussions evolved just really over the past few years. And just wanted to give a quick intro to, sort of Brookfield for those who aren't familiar with Brookfield, and sort of our process and our approach to the, sort of ESG and DEI specific principles within our company. So if you could go to the next slide, just a quick few highlights. Brookfield Properties is the real estate arm of Brookfield Asset Management, a global asset manager with about $625 billion in assets under management worldwide. And so, we have this great advantage of being able to see how, DEI, ESG principles are being executed across the world, and really, use those best practices to streamline what we're doing here locally. Brookfield Properties specifically, operates more than 800 properties and roughly 375 million square feet of real estate around the globe. And so it's just incredibly important for us to, make sure that we as a company are at the forefront of pushing the bounds of, ESG holistically and DEI very specifically as it relates to the impact on all of us. If you go to the next slide, we'll just touch a little bit upon the general ESG principles at Brookfield. This is something that I think a lot of companies, and Lisa touched upon it, are really starting to focus more on over the past few years, and really trying to, identify and define what are your principles, right? It's easy to put some nice marketing jargon on your, on your PowerPoint presentation and have things sound good, but, how do you put your money where your mouth is? And publishing reports, having accountability, tracking progress, setting goals. That's really what this process is all about. And, of course, the 4 pillars that we've identified are, first and foremost, ensure the well-being and safety of all of our employees, make sure people they feel included, they feel like they belong, they feel proud to work for Brookfield, mitigate the impact on the environment of all of our development. I think that one goes without saying, and is universally upheld. Strong governance practices, right? I think, generally speaking, real estate development specifically has gotten a bit of a reputation over the years for, being less than transparent, and that impacts local communities and perception, and changing that, right, by being upstanding citizens and doing well. And then just, generally being good corporate citizens, right? Making sure that we are in and of the community and putting our best foot forward. So go to the next slide. We just see a bit of an evolution of how ESG has taken the next step into focusing on the DEI component. And here at Brookfield, what we realized pretty quickly, right, is it's easy for a CEO, board of directors to issue an edict to say, be better at DEI. But what does that really mean? How do you really do it, right? It starts with the employees. It starts with the people at your company. So last year, actually, Brookfield founded our Diversity and Equity Council, and it's made up of a diverse group of talent across Brookfield, and they come together to really guide and inform, what are our goals, what is our mission? Because it shouldn't be, an edict from the top. It should be, a grassroots movement internally that your employees buy into, that we all believe, that then gets disseminated out into all of our projects and into the community. So we're really excited about the fact that this started last year, and the progress has been really impressive to see. Even just the change in narrative internally and how DEI is talked about has been incredible. And if we flip to the next slide, it just gives a little bit of an overview of what is this council, what are the results, and some of that are these employee engagement groups, right? So, really just empowering our team, our employees, to form groups that, really help guide the narrative internally and make sure everybody feels included. And that's everything from Brookfield Cares, which is really the, division within our group that focuses on, philanthropy, volunteerism, et cetera, to, the Brookfield Black Professionals Network, right? Which is, just making sure when you come to Brookfield, you have a place that you feel included if you're an African American at Brookfield. So, they're really a core aspect of our culture. It's all voluntary, but they, the intent is to foster an inclusive workplace and, provide volunteer opportunities and develop our future leaders. And again, starting at the core, it just makes it a natural part of our process when we get into a community, engage in a process and a project for these, these ethos to just become part of what we are. So I will pause there and look forward to the further discussion as we get into the agenda.
Great, thanks, Lisa and Frank. So you can see why we've picked these two firms, because I think, it's clear that PGIM and Brookfield are leaders in terms of transparency around setting ESG goals, DEI goals, measuring results and holding themselves accountable. So Kirk, let's kick it off with you. Maybe a brief historical context as someone who has been living with and engaged in DEI efforts in Boston for some time now, now involved in a very meaningful project, Dorchester Bay City. Kind of how has DEI evolved within the commercial real estate industry here in Boston? Where do you think it's headed?
Yeah, great. Well, I'm excited to be here with all of you, and I'm especially excited about the horsepower that I think Lisa and Frank represented in terms of the conviction of two major players in the real estate industry. And, I think there's a lot to be said about that. But probably if you wind the clock back to when Lisa and I launched the USA Fund back in 2005 as what was called the Triple Bottom Line Fund, People, Planet, Profit. I'm not sure ESG was even an acronym that we all could identify. It was then kind of ESG is the evolved form of SRI, which is socially responsible investing. And that was really what we embarked upon, trying to measure the metrics of the projects that we were investing in. If some of you who've been in the market will remember One Brigham Circle as one of the top sellers coming out of the recession. That was a USA Fund project. You may remember Boston State Hospital, which did over 500 different types of housing units. That was a USA Fund project. And we did that up and down the East Coast with investors like GE and TICREF and AXA and Blue Cross and all the banks. I think they knew that SRI was the precursor to ESG. And I think the commitment to get behind a new fund that had this sort of triple purpose was in fact smart, because it unlocked potential and access to opportunities in partnership with people we might not have partnered with, like local CDCs. In fact, Lisa was so shrewd that she bought one of our assets as Prudential that she helped build as USA Fund. And that was a partnership for One Greenway with the Asian Community Development Corp. One of the highest numbers of on-site affordable units downtown Boston for quite some time. So I think there is a history that we don't all know about, or maybe some of us know about, that we have had this going on in our market for a while. What I'd like to say is, in many ways, Dorchester Bay City is the sort of pinnacle of 15 years of effort in this space. And we've decided to make those values a cornerstone in terms of affordability, closing the racial wealth gap, providing accessibility to opportunity and to sites through also dealing with sea level rise, sustainability, and transportation equity. So those are all kind of not new ideas. They're very much about what we're about as Accordia partners, both Dick and I. And I guess what I'd like to say is that I believe that ESG, while it's absolutely the right thing to do, it's also the thing that we have to do to get our projects entitled, to get investment from major financial sources, And I would think that in a country that we're all experiencing over the last few years, where we're very polarized, if we don't find a way that we have a rising tide carry all boats, we in fact will be in a very dire position, and all of our capitalistic efforts will be for naught. So I'll stop there and say I'm honored that these companies and these individuals are here to talk about what they're doing.
Thanks, Kirk. So in Boston, we often hear about DEI in the context of winning government business. You know, folks understand the Massport model here, where 25% of the points to win a designation are centered around the diversity, equity, and inclusion strategy of the bidder. But Lisa, talk about this, you know, as a business imperative. You mentioned that, and talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think starting with the government requirements for development is important, right? It sort of helps to cut through the underbrush and make people pay attention and create systems that further diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether that's on the general contracting side or, you know, on the capital side. But ultimately, the way that this is going to get to scale is if businesses and investors like us see this as an essential part of our business and our business model, and as a way to create a competitive edge. And you know, there are lots of different pieces to that. Some of that is the makeup of our professionals. The next generation of talent is not going to look like the last generation of real estate talent, right? So if we want to have the best talent, and there is a war for talent right now, we have to have a culture of inclusion, and we have to be able to bring that talent on board and keep them on board. Part of that is creating a purpose-driven culture, so that connection to community engagement and to ESG and environmental and social purpose is a piece of it. But a lot of it is also people being able to see themselves in the leadership of a company. And you know, in the real estate industry, we struggle with that because so much of the senior leadership of all of our companies is still largely white and largely male. So we've tried to, you know, we've had a lot of focus on that at PGIM Real Estate. We still have a long way to go, but it's clearly a really important piece of the future of our business. I think yeah, and I think the same goes for the partners and vendors that we have, right? Same principle around talent and being able to place capital with and work with the best operators, developers, and managers of tomorrow are going to be largely firms that are owned and led by women and people of color.
Thank you. And Frank, what would you add to that?
Yeah, it's, I mean, Lisa, well said, first and foremost. It was interesting because just this morning, as I was having my morning cup of coffee and reading the news, that article popped up. Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, published an open letter to shareholders, and in the very beginning of the letter, he makes a comment about stakeholder capitalism, and it's not about being woke, quote unquote, to use the term that he used in his letter, but he's I'm just going to read real quick to quote him. But he said, stakeholder capitalism is driven by mutually beneficial relationship between you, the employees, customers, suppliers, communities, and companies that rely on each other to prosper, right? It's like a perfect summation of kind of what Lisa was just saying. And I think it's how we all feel, right? It's par for the course now, it's expected. And when we sit down, me sort of as a development lead, when I sit down with a local official in the city of Boston, the first thing that they're asking, so who did you meet with in the community? What did they have to say? What was their thoughts? Here are the 6 other people you should be meeting with to make sure that they're bought in and invested. So it's an imperative, right? It's like, I would not be doing my job well if the first thing, we're just in this hyper-connected society, right? So if we start a project and we haven't already made those connections and, gone out into the community, made sure we're talking to those decision makers, the focused on the diversity, being inclusive, we're already losing. So it really is an imperative. And I do think like the nice thing is the paradigm has just shifted. That's just normal now. It's just expected. And I think we're all, sort of in tune to just having this sort of DEI conversation just be part of the process now. But that being said, we have to keep pushing the limits, right? Because as I think we'll talk about a little later on, like every project's different, year to year is different, month to month is different, needs, wants of diverse communities change. So, you know, it's an ongoing conversation, an ongoing process, and just, you know, again, excited that we're having it.
Thanks. So you both publish really interesting and extensive ESG reports. And I think as global companies, you're starting to see those more and more. So talk about how maybe the reporting aspect of ESG has driven accountability and intention with both of your organizations. Maybe Lisa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think one of the places that it starts for us is our investors. Our investors are really sophisticated around this, and they ask us. They've been asking us for years, and they require granular level data about how we're doing and what we're doing. So I think that reporting and transparency has become more and more important for us. And then in turn, you know, we ask all of the companies that we work with about their, not only their leadership, but we've started asking questions around non-discrimination policies and you know, proactive efforts that the companies that we work with and invest with are making around DEI.
And Frank, anything to add around reporting and how that maybe has influenced the work?
Sure. Yeah. Listen, I think it's about accountability. I liken it to, you know, sort of the green building movement, you know, going back a few decades, where the USGBC was established, and we started to evaluate and analyze our properties, and you establish a baseline. Like, how are we doing? How is our energy usage? How is our, you know, sort of carbon production, et cetera? And then over time, that evolves into, you know, sort of comparison to your peers in advancement and competition. And, you know, we're in a world today where it's just normal to make sure you're focused on, you know, green building technology and new development. And I liken it, you know, sort of to the same thing, where we've gathered a lot of data. So I can tell you, read off the fact that, you know, 60% of our board of directors at Brookfield are women. 46% of our overall workforce are women. Okay, that's great, but how does that compare? Is that great? I don't know, right? So you start off with data gathering, and then from there, you take your historical accomplishments or data, and you set goals, and you figure out what are the next steps, right? You plan and figure out how you do better. And so I think, if nothing else, you know, sort of the formalized process and the competition of, you know, looking at your peer set and figuring out how do you do better, it just drives the process. And then, listen, there's some organizations, we belong to ILPA, Institutional Limited Partners Association, right? And they're starting to publish more and more, you know, sort of ESG statistics and reports. And, you know, again, it just allows you to sort of right size yourself in the industry, and without, you know, sort of reporting, tracking, and publishing, people just won't do it. So I think it's really important, and, you know, we're proud to do it.
There's a piece of this too that's about what do you do with the data. And I think, Frank, you were sort of getting at this. We now collect that data at a very granular level and tie it to performance evaluation for our senior executives. So we have some targets, like we have a 5/5 target, 5% improvement in diversity over 5 years. And each manager is responsible for that. And then on our employee, everybody in the company in their performance evaluation has to set and meet some DEI objectives and targets. And that's, you know, everyone from investment professionals to systems folks. And
that gets folks' attention.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah, and I was just gonna also add in that what we've also realized is that I alluded to this at the beginning, but it needs to be top to bottom, right? So we basically make this an imperative from, you know, the administrative staff all the way up to the CEO. So we really do. We ask our, you know, our folks organizing catering for lunches to do some research and find out who we're ordering from, what is the makeup of the company that we're giving business to, and make sure that, you know, they're socially responsible, that they're diverse. And really just, again, try to just make it part of the sort of natural ethos of the company from top to bottom.
If Kirk, jump in.
Yeah, I think this is great. I love it because I'm watching this race for excellence in reporting and accountability. I mean, I would never imagine we would be here, but it is true that amongst, you know, the paragon of great companies, we can do great things when we decide to take them on and do them in a very innovative and granular manner. I mean, a lot of the points that Lisa made are important because, inclusion just on the gender and ethnicity issue, they're not the same. They're not interchangeable. They're two different perspectives. And so you have to get granular so your board isn't like, all right, I'm half women, that's good, I'm done. It's okay, well, who's thinking with the other side of the brain that may not be in the room because the gender box get checked? So I think that's important. ESG reporting is really in its infancy. And while the reports that both Brookfield and Prudential put out are amazing, I mean, you saw a couple of pages of what is a 100-page report. It's really now getting leaned in on by the SEC and Department of Labor in a way that public companies have another level of accountability that's just beginning to be clarified. And if we look to Europe as an example, because it's a decade ahead in ESG accountability and conviction, we'll probably see where we're going to end up. In my mind, we're going to get a lot more granular. Everybody of which, in the mid-market or in the middle tier is going to have to respond. So if investors demand it and managers have to provide it, sponsors are going to figure out how to act on it. And that is just the nature of pursuit of capital. And so it flows downstream. And today, while for some of us, what is anecdotal, I think will be structured tomorrow, is my expectation a lot more along the lines of what is expected in Europe. So just a thought.
And maybe to add a little controversy to this conversation. So Frank, we had a conversation earlier around sort of your experience in other cities, maybe competitor cities, New York, Los Angeles, compared to Boston. And when you're putting together teams, kind of what can Boston learn from maybe some of these other cities? And maybe are there government policies or that we should put in place to really replicate here what's kind of been market driven in other places?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a tough problem too, because every city's unique, has its own set of challenges and motivations. And listen, I will say Boston, historically has been, white. And if you look at the contracting base and the subcontracting base, it still is. And it's a challenge to, bring that diversity in, locally. So I think some of it's going to have to be, the acceptance of outside contractors, minority contractors being, sort of welcomed into the city to expand that pool. But they've also done a really nice job. The Massport model is often referenced, and a lot of it is just similar to what most other cities and states are doing. But the focus on minority capital, I think, was pushing the bounds in a very positive way. And it's candidly why I got to know Kirk a bit, because in most other cities, it's just not hard to find, LA, San Francisco, DC, New York. It's just not hard to find minority investment pools of, large capital. And it was a challenge in Boston when we first started, started becoming more active. And so, Kirk and others like him have, done a great job with, I think some of the push from the Massport model to really focus on how do you assemble diverse buckets of capital, so that you're really building, instead of just the supply chain and the contracting community, you're really building that sort of, generational wealth in minority communities that you need to make real change, to implement real change. So I was super happy to see that. But, again, I think every city, can draw lessons learned from other cities, and Boston in particular, I just think needs to, sort of maybe open its doors a bit more, to help sort of, I would say, blend the pool of talent across consultants, contractors, et cetera, and just make it a little bit more, more of a rainbow color instead of a little whitewashed, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate that honesty perspective. Kirk, so you teamed up with Brookfield to pursue a major project here in Boston. And what impressed you about their approach?
I think, as I mentioned before, they bring, and as does Lisa bring, that conviction of a large company where they want to do things at a very high level with sophistication, not just check the box. And I think that requires sophisticated responses for, significant public-private partnerships. It's why Dick and I came together to form Accordia Partners to pursue projects like the Massport projects, but now at DBC. It's also a lot of credit to be given to the governor and to the mayor, both the former and the current one, in terms of their conviction. So it's a kind of a push me, pull you thing. And I think, once again, if it's demanded as a requirement of execution or assignment of an opportunity, it becomes a race to do the best job we can. And I think both PGIM and Brookfield have taken that on in the way. I just want to say one more thing. I think that, we're lucky with our embarrassment of riches in Boston, because I think the sort of proliferation of the life science industry and other opportunities in the market has brought more significant players of the public company nature with a lot of the sort of agenda that you hear being part of their DNA in Lisa and Frank.
Yeah, and so this is not easy work. I want to acknowledge that, and sort of shifting a company culture, right, to embrace, diversity, equity, inclusion is not easy. So maybe I'll get Lisa and Frank to talk about times when maybe you made a mistake or a misstep and sort of what you learned from that experience. Maybe Lisa, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I was supposed to think about this in advance so that I say the right thing here. But
Yeah.
before I go there, I want to stir the pot a little bit more on Boston. Because when I was in Boston is special. Boston has some special institutions that have historically been a barrier to DEI, particularly in the real estate and contracting industries. And, my knowledge is now 10 years old, but 10 years ago, there was a real perception that there was a trade-off between DEI and excellence. Like, it was sort of pervasive. Oh, we have to do it because it's publicly required, but there's going to be a trade-off, right? And as long as that's the culture and that's the ethos, we're never going to get there from a business perspective. And I sense that things have begun to shift in Boston. Certainly the public sector has become much more diverse, with the election of the mayor, of Mayor Wu, and things changing quite a bit. But, I wonder, and maybe this is a question for you, Kirk, like, is there still this perception that there's a trade-off? And if there is, how do we get past that? Like, how do we get past that? So this is actually a business advantage rather than a tax on doing business.
No, it's a great point. I mean, I think in 2015 and then in 2017, McKinsey sort of cited this 30% better returns and outcomes from diverse teams. And I think you could, if you went back to 15 and 17 and you said that with a megaphone and wrote it in the sky, I'm not sure who I could get to believe it, because I'm not sure it was comfortable. I would say that, quite honestly, the last 2 years have transformed the thinking. And actually, Frank did a great job of bringing up BlackRock's, perspective. Just to have major CEOs saying, this is a cornerstone of my company, I'm not going to go forward without it being part of what I do, changes it from a consultant reporting about an analytical process to total shareholder return requirements and LTI and STI components of people's pay. So that's what changed, and that in some ways matches the, we talked about excellence a lot here, the excellence of the opportunity that can exist with the excellence of the companies that want precision in the execution. So I think it was all the catalyst was our last 2 years, but the instrument is both of you and your companies and your CEOs taking a posture on it, and people like me and Aries, who's our partner at Dorchester Bay City, saying this is part of our DNA for the 15-year project that we're doing for 6 million square feet.
And I'm going to echo what Lisa said about the next generation, right? They want to show up at companies, at workplaces where there's a diverse, population and thought, right? And I think what's changing is that, the senior executives in Boston that have been predominantly white and male are going home, and their kids are asking them, like, what are you doing at your company? Like, they're more socially aware and asking those questions at home. And I think I think that's going to change this perspective of like, we could just ignore it because it's, you know, it's a social movement, it's going to go away. So, you know, Frank, you want to talk about any kind of misstep or mistake? Lisa avoided that, but I think starting the podcast is a good thing.
No, actually, I'm glad she addressed it, because I think it's incredibly important to just be upfront about it. I mean, I think a big part of this discussion is just, you know, being a little bit uncomfortable with what you need to talk about and being open and honest. But yeah, just in terms of mistakes, I mean, listen, you know, you do enough projects, of course you're going to make mistakes and learn from them. And I think the couple of examples that, you know, came to mind for me, and I referenced this a bit earlier, but at the same time, we were developing a deal in Los Angeles that I worked on, and a deal in Washington, D.C. And we had, you know, just developed projects in both of those markets. And we thought we had the formula for community engagement and making sure that, you know, everyone came out in support of our project. And that included something like, you know, including a community center in both of those projects. Well, listen, like I said earlier, times change, needs and wants change in the community. And everyone was like, listen, we don't need a community center. We have 11 of them. People keep building them. It's not what we need and want. Listen to us. Here's what we need. And in one example, it was in LA's Chinatown. It was, we need services that help, you know, sort of first generation Chinese immigrants, you know, be able to move into an apartment, be a translator, you know, a financial advisor who can help them navigate what they need to do to actually live comfortably here, right? So it's just a different listening to the community needs in real time, and, you know, adjusting project to project, I think is something that, you know, we can all learn and we should just all pay attention to. And then, you know, the other example that comes to mind is in DC. DC has a first source hiring requirement. So if you get any, you know, I think it's about $300,000 of you know, local assistance from the government for any given project, you're subject to first source hiring, and that's local hiring. And local hiring is something that I don't think Boston has as big of an issue with, but in San Francisco and certainly in DC, it's a huge focus. And that's been around for a long time, and that leads to, you know, a requirement to have a workforce intermediary, basically a person on your staff that helps, you know, facilitate hiring at the process, at the project, and walk people through that process. And that just led Brookfield to just establish a department that does this and implement it across, you know, across all of our projects. And in one case at that development, we sold a parcel off. And those requirements don't necessarily translate to the next buyer, but it's part of a master plan development we're developing, and it was incredibly important for us to just make sure that we were implementing all of the, you know, workforce strategies, local hiring strategies that we work so hard to, you know, to maintain. And they had no vested interest and candidly no mandate to do it, and it was an uphill battle. And we convinced them, and they got there. But when you're working on these large scale projects, just making sure that you're sort of making sure those requirements flow through to an next buyer to the extent that, you know, they're important, which they all are. And then as the owners are doing a good job of selling the benefits of things like the workforce intermediary to make sure that these folks are you know, the most qualified people are being hired for these jobs, leads to better retention, leads to lower costs, leads to more profit, right? So it all comes back to the same part of the discussion, which is, you know,
it's a business imperative. Right.
So that's right.
So Jeanne, I just want to add to this misstep conversation, because just after George Floyd's death, I had a conversation with one of the larger real estate companies, multinational, and I got on the phone with the CHRO, and you know, that person wanted to talk. They insisted that their employees only wanted to talk about this, and I said they didn't. And I was insistent that if you weren't ready to do something, then what was the point of having a conversation? And we actually went back and forth on this, and the person disconnected from me, and I guess they went off and had a conversation. I think folks have done a better job of getting the right people in the seats to facilitate the dialogue in the last 2 years, as opposed to be insistent in a position that they might have had. The reality is that people of color, people like myself, want change with urgency. And I think companies are hearing that and saying we need the right people to facilitate that dialogue in our companies. And I have no doubt that Frank and Lisa are those people in their companies, along with others, in changing the dialogue so that there are outcomes and actionable steps. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and I think Frank's point about being uncomfortable with uncomfortable conversations is part of the mix, right? Let me grab a couple of questions from the Q&A from our audience. one question is, what are the minimum requirements or principles investors look for to inform their decision-making process? I guess either Lisa or Frank could take that. It's sounding like a, from an ESG perspective, perhaps. Do you understand the question?
So
Would you mind repeating it, Jeanne? I just want to make sure I understood it.
Yeah, you guys can see the Q&A, right?
I'm sorry, pulling it up now. Here we go.
Yeah, minimum requirements or principles investors look for to inform their decision-making process. So this is when your investors are looking to invest in your organization, they're asking for minimum requirements or principles.
I think it varies quite a bit by investor type. Historically, our investors have been about 75% public and private pension plans, and especially the public pension plans have always asked questions about DEI. I think that's largely, driven by the Treasurer's Office, and even in the face of all those questions, I'm not sure that there's a minimum. Like, we're still, as Kirk said, we're still at the beginning. We're still sort of like, asking for the information, and there's not necessarily a minimum because there's not an apples to apples comparison that we're able to make yet. Having said that, and as someone who's out there raising capital, my complaint about that is I don't think any of the large pension plans are making proactive allocations based on DEI or ESG criteria. What they will do is, if there's two investments that they're looking at, ESG or DEI will tip the scales, but it's very rare. Maybe, Illinois is the exception with their statewide ESG requirements, coming through the legislature. People are not proactive. Large investors are not necessarily proactively making the decisions based on ESG or DEI. It's a different story in private wealth. So, private wealth, which is a growing segment of our investor base, really often has some more specific criteria that they're looking for. It tends to be a little bit idiosyncratic, but this includes wealth managers, family foundations, family offices. Generally come with some specific, if they're making an ESG or an impact investment, they come with some specific criteria that they're looking for.
Yeah. Frank, anything to add on that?
Yeah, she hit the nail on the head. I mean, I think we're in pretty much the exact same boat. And just to, repeat what we said earlier, again, reporting's in its infancy, and I do think more funds will start to pay attention to these metrics from company to company. And, just like we have funds who will only invest in, lead gold projects, just to, again, use the environmental parallel again, I'm sure that's coming, but at this point, it's really, sort of dependent on private wealth versus institutional and, sector specific.
So I would just add, sort of with my former money manager hat and public board member hat, that clearly the E, the S, and the G are not equally weighted. There has been a proliferation of E, and you can find a lot more sustainable funds and alignment. The S is lagging, in terms of metrics and expectations and the way that gets defined. G is a little, more quantifiable, and certainly a lot of people have improved their board diversity, and that's partially due to proxy and ISS and ICI and other oversight organizations that weigh in and reveal the way people are making decisions. So anyway, we got a lot of work to do on the S.
Yeah. Let me bring in another question about talent. A lot of DEI is focused on the talent pipeline and bringing in junior staffers to shift the industry. What strategies have your companies employed, or do you have the same, or have you seen that ensure mid and senior management is also diverse, right? They're sort of saying we need to find people and bring them through our talent pipeline in order to diversify our mid and senior management. Other thoughts and strategies that your firms have employed?
I'll just to chime in quickly, because I think Lisa gave me a great idea with, their sort of accountability on their sort of management structure and making sure there's a focus and performance metrics based on DEI. But as I mentioned earlier, I mean, we're really starting to introduce this into the discussion, performance reviews across the board from top to bottom, so that it isn't just, at the top level. So, we, Brookfield sort of has this, mentality of a lot of companies have sort of 2 and out, right? You work for an investment bank or private wealth fund for a couple of years and then you move on to something else. Here it's sort of 2 and up. And so, if you're performing here, you're just going to continue to ascend. And I think the great thing with that is if you're bringing in via our sort of diversity and inclusion council, you're bringing in folks that are diverse, that feel included, are proud to work at Brookfield. In a very short term, you're going to, just see that diversity spread throughout the company. But I do also think that, some accountability and some tie to performance and bonuses is another great motivation, because carrot and stick, usually need them both. So I like that idea that Lisa posed earlier.
Yeah, and they're out there. Kirk and I both belong to a trade association, real estate executive council, that is, a very large organization of very senior level real estate professionals. So when people tell me they're not there, I said, you ought to check out the, the membership of this organization, because it's, I had to get Kirk to write me a recommendation to get in. It's a exclusive group of very high level professionals, many of them that serve on corporate boards throughout the country.
And I would just, to pick up on that, I'd say that in the last 2 years, there's been a proliferation of large corporate partners with Real Estate Executive Council, partially because they're looking for access to either good ideas, good people, or talent, or ways to think differently. And in everything from board diversity to, to senior management, that's present. I just want to say that for us at Accordia, part of the fact of wearing your DNA on your sleeve about wanting to be the most inclusive, diverse real estate platform in the country is in its own way an attraction. I think every one of the people that work with us is proud of that agenda, not just that purpose, but also how we go about achieving it and, our values. And so I think we've got to wear that DNA on our sleeve more to get the Great Resignation to stop and people to not bee farm or whatever they're doing and come back and be part of making change. So
I think for us, you have highlighted a really big challenge, which is keeping mid-level people and advancing them through the ranks. We, like everyone else, lost a bunch of kind of mid to high level junior mid-level and one step below. And I think one of the on our exit interviews, one of the things that we heard that was a big reason for leaving, aside from compensation, everybody wants more compensation, is career pathways, like career ladders, really being able to see that there's a pathway to advancement. And, I can think of a couple of examples on my own team where we've actually moved diverse candidates around the company in order to keep them and to find them the best suited job for them. And in a fairly hierarchical corporate environment, we didn't really do that before. So that's sort of for us, that's kind of a cultural breakthrough. And I think it's really an essential building block of keeping good, strong, diverse talent in the company.
Yeah, we've done a similar thing with moving an intern from different departments here at Colliers in Boston to give them that exposure. Okay, final question I see. How do associate level professionals drive ESG practices amongst their senior and executive level members in their companies? Is there a playbook to support this? And I think maybe the ERGs, the employee resource groups, that a lot of companies have now might be one avenue, but I'll let you guys think about that, talk about that. Maybe Lisa?
Yeah, it's a great question. A year and a half ago, we started a series of racial equity work streams where we were focused on particular problems, and they were led by senior executives, like myself and other more senior people at the company. And we, on each of those, we would ask a couple of high-performing usually diverse associates to come and do the legwork for us. And so it was a great way for people to get engaged with an issue that they cared about, to get exposure to senior management kind of across the whole platform. And I think it's a great model to sort of create these opportunities for associate level folks to really interact with senior level folks, not necessarily in their direct, that they wouldn't connect with in their direct day-to-day, and then to be able to show what they can do and make those contacts.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I do think the employee engagement groups are a great platform to help evolve and expand the sort of discussion and narrative. And what was interesting is we had for the past few years we've had a few of the EEGs that I mentioned earlier, but one of the newer ones is Brookfield Next, and it's for new employees to Brookfield. It's really just about how you sort of people in the early stage of their careers interact, engage at the company. They're not to be defined as Asian, Black, gay. It's just we're new to Brookfield, so to some extent you have to start there, right? So people just feel included and comfortable in their own skin at your company, and then branch out from there, because it can be a little overwhelming. I think we found when someone comes in new and they're immediately put into a category, feel obligated to be put into a category, and sometimes the first category is just like, you're just a new employee here, feel comfortable, and then figure out your place and where you want to sort of move within the company. And I think the nice thing is the culture here at Brookfield definitely supports that, and it allows us to have sort of open and honest conversation. So I think it'll continue to, again, evolve and change, but just having the discussion is a huge part of the process.
And I would say in the case of Accordia, the associates are driving the content. I'm not putting together the presentation. You have an incredible voice in what you put forth as the deck, or the what you think is going to resonate with constituents. So don't underestimate your import and impact. And in our case, that's someone. In some cases, we hired through the Crest Commercial Real Estate Success Training Program. So they've progressed to someone who has a direct impact in our voice. So we're excited about that.
Great, thanks. I'm not sure we have time for one last question before Tamara jumps on, but in reference to the green building movement, credit is given to mechanisms like USGBC, but failed to acknowledge policies like the Paris Agreement provide international pressures. While local policies like Massport may move the needle, what is the overarching national, international pressure and expectations that could further this work?
Yeah, for us, it's net zero. We made a net zero by 2050, and we're having to do all sorts of things that are really driving it forward. And I think that's gonna change the game.
Yeah.
And I'd say it's capital flows. I mean, basically, everybody is clamoring for that same dollar, and it's amazing how excellence is bred out of competition. So let's keep upping the bar.
Well, thanks. Terrific panelists. I thank you very much for your time and thought and insight. And Tamara's back on. So Tamara, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you, Jeanne. You were an excellent moderator. Great discussion today. Thank you to Frank and to Kirk and to Lisa for joining us and for your time. Great discussion. We will be sharing this presentation with all attendees. We encourage you to share it with your networks as well. Some really great takeaways for all of us to think about today. So with that, thank you all and have a great day. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.